Welcome, everyone, to the latest episode of the Legal Lunch Byte. My name is Jonathan Bench. I'm joined today by my colleague, Kristin Westfall, who's in California. Kristin, really happy to have you here. I know you recently joined the firm, and so we haven't even had a chance to really have a proper conversation. So I'm really looking forward to speaking with you and learning more about your expertise, and specifically in this month's theme of the cannabis industry, about cannabis tourism, cannabis ecotourism today. So maybe you can start out by giving us some of your background.
Sure, thanks. Nice to meet you as well. I've been an attorney for many years. The past 5 or so, I've been focusing on cannabis. It's a new and upcoming area in California for an attorney. It's exciting. There's a lot of twists and changes as we go along. I've learned a lot, but having litigated in many different areas from construction defect, civil litigation, class action, it kind of all ties into cannabis because, believe it or not, it has a little bit of each of those when you are practicing in the cannabis arena.
I found the same thing too. I grew up at a firm in Bangor, Maine, and cannabis had just come online a couple of years after I started practice, and no one else was really interested in looking into it. And so I said we should get to the forefront of this. And so I've been in the industry for a long time and kind of on the periphery and back and forth. But the same thing, it's really interesting when a new industry emerges and it touches all of these different areas. It makes a lot of work for lawyers, which is great, but it also is extremely complex because you have, how do you do a cannabis lease, and what happens if you're fighting about a lease or a partnership dispute or any number of things. I'm always surprised at the kind of projects I get pulled into in the cannabis industry, but certainly never a dull day.
Yep, exactly.
So let's start out with what new areas you're seeing in the cannabis industry. You're 5 years in. What's new? What surprised you? What is kind of and what kind of normal projects are you working on?
So there is something new that's just come online recently. And it's really exciting and fun. Obviously, I'm still working on a lot of the civil litigation business disputes with cannabis, but the new area revolves around cannabis tourism. And it used to be that people would go to like Amsterdam or Spain, and the whole purpose was to just experience cannabis because it was legal there. Then when Colorado started, people would go to Colorado and they would go there just to be able to use and consume cannabis. Then they started coming to California. And now Los Angeles and San Francisco are pretty much the epicenter for cannabis tourism. That is traditional cannabis tourism, where you're going to go someplace, try out some of these name brands, take a look at the different dispensaries, almost like a wine tour. You can go with someone who knows the industry, knows the different types of dispensaries, what their reputation is, what products they're selling, and they can kind of point you in the direction, everything from a very curated boutique type of experience to more of a general, let me introduce you to cannabis and the different types. What I think is fantastic about these tours is they're also very educational. So even if people come and do the very traditional route, they're getting educated on cannabis. They're just not walking into a store and trying whatever name or description sounds good. They've got someone who's very knowledgeable, who's interacting with them and letting them have the best possible experience, which is what all of us in the industry want for people that are getting involved in cannabis. We want them to have a really good, educated experience with cannabis. So that's kind of the traditional mode of cannabis tourism. But lately, I'm seeing it move into kind of a different direction as well.
And what do you see as the factors? Before I know we're going to talk about cannabis ecotourism, which I think is very interesting. But what do you say is driving this generally? Like, what I know that California has been legal. How did California wrestle the crown from Amsterdam, or what are really some of the reasons that people are coming to California? Is it just the perfectly curated experience, deep expertise in in the cultivation and manufacturing? I feel like California is just good at everything. So how did California get there?
Well, I think it's a couple of things. One, Amsterdam has recently passed some new legislation, which is impacting some of its cannabis tourism. But that being said, Colorado had the crown for a while, but they didn't really cater to this kind of tourism. They actually faced some backlash with folks that were coming to Colorado just to experience cannabis, whereas California has embraced it. And we also kind of have a different system set up where we have state laws, but we also have individual city and county laws. So as a result of that, you are able to do different things in different counties and different cities. For example, in West Hollywood, you can go and you can have an experience where you consume cannabis, and you can also like kind of hang out in a lounge. They had a place where you could go and you could eat food that was either paired specifically for cannabis, or it was kind of like a coffee shop. You could go socialize with others that enjoyed cannabis while you had a coffee or tea, or even consumed, food in that environment. So it's a very different vibe and a very different experience. I think the opportunity to not just go to different dispensaries where it's legal, but to try these different experiences is what's driving folks to come to California. Plus, there's so many other things to do. So I would say a lot of people I talk to, they're not just coming to do cannabis. They're coming to try a lot of other things in California. So those two dovetail really nicely and has created a drive for people to come to California.
Very interesting. And so you said San Francisco and LA are the two centers.
Right now, yes, they are.
Interesting. Okay, great. And what about cannabis ecotourism? How's that different from kind of normal cannabis tourism?
Well, that's new. And that I think is really exciting. We work with a lot of folks that are cultivating cannabis and, growing the cannabis, processing. Sometimes they do processing. Mostly it's the growing of the cannabis. Typically, we're working with the outdoor farmers, although we work with some folks that have hoop houses as well. What they're finding is people were very curious about the process of growing cannabis. So they started off offering tours, kind of like where you would go to a vineyard and you would tour kind of the winery and the vineyard, and they talk about how, the vines, the grapes are grown. Now they're talking about how different strains of cannabis are grown, what it looks like, what the process is. That has actually morphed into something even more, where I have a client who has recently set up a bed and breakfast, kind of an Airbnb on their property. People can book it. They come, they can stay from a week to a month, and they embed them in the farm. So they come and they'll get up in the morning and see what happens. What are the morning routines? They will come and they can actually plant. They can look at the cloning. They can shadow and follow people around. They can ride in the tractor. They can work the sprayer. And people are really excited about that. And people who grow cannabis are very excited to show and demystify the process. At the end of the day, it's just another agricultural crop. It's something that they're giving back to the land. They are very mindful in the process of how they are growing the cannabis. They want the best possible plant. And their goal is to educate the public, to let them understand that this isn't some scary backwoods people with guns standing around growing cannabis. It's actually a legitimate, kind of a large scale farming operation by people who care very deeply about their product and about doing things in a very eco-friendly way.
Sounds really smart from a business standpoint as well, where the market continues to get saturated, or at least, new players come in. There's much more competition in a mature market than there was in California 15, 20 years ago. That's very interesting. It seems like following another trend, which is the general agricultural tourism as well. I've been seeing lately on Instagram a lot of people not pushing, but promoting their own farms. The kind of getting back to the soil, and it's an interesting business model. And I'm a business lawyer, so I love seeing the different ways that people make money and how they engage their clients and potential customers. It's very interesting.
Well, and just on that note, something else that they're doing, because I wasn't aware of this, people that come and do the tours, then of course they tell other people, they also become loyal to the brand. So even if the person growing it doesn't white label or sell their own brand, you'd be surprised. They have started selling t-shirts, sweatshirts, trucker hats, canteens, water bottles. And they said that was just because people were asking for them and they thought at first that would be a nice kind of souvenir. They now have a whole separate business selling those types of products that they never in their wildest dreams anticipated there would be a demand for. So it really has opened up another revenue stream from them that has done very, very well. And it was a very big surprise to my particular clients, but more and more people are kind of jumping on the bandwagon and doing that.
Yeah, it's very interesting from a business standpoint. I was thinking at first when you were explaining this that people might be training their own competition, which is true. But if we have state lines, if someone's touring from, Virginia, West Virginia, Alabama, somewhere, they come for the experience, they come for the training, and they learn, but they wouldn't be necessarily be direct competitors because of the state by state regulations and laws that are on the books. So really interesting. Wow. Okay, so what about some issues? You're on the litigation side of the table usually, so you certainly see your fair share of issues facing the cannabis tourism.
Well, it's interesting that you brought up a point of not wanting to train your competition. So we didn't used to see this in the past. Cannabis, when it started, was very much let's everybody share. There are certain strains that everybody's going to use. There are certain techniques. It was very much an open marketplace with everybody was sharing knowledge. That's how it started. As it got more commercialized, people were starting to want to patent or trademark or call things trade secrets. And that's a whole other program about that. But when you bring people in and you start to open it up and you share these experiences, of course, then you kind of blown the whole idea that certain things are a trade secret. You've made them widely available. You're sharing that with the public. So I have cautioned my clients to the extent they think they have any sort of formulas or processes or anything like that that they would consider a trade secret, something that they do that's special that they don't want the public to know about. Take steps, maybe an NDA with people that are visiting the farm. Maybe don't show that part of it. Certainly don't have it widely available. So that is one thing I have talked about and cautioned. I haven't had any sort of litigation or cases that have come up in that regard for ecotourism, but I can see that coming down, the pathway or down the horizon as these things become more and more prevalent. So that's one thing. The other thing is just like, when they started these vineyard or winery tours, local cities and counties, they have some concerns about traffic. They have concerns about safety. So they don't want people that are go and sampling, not so much the ecotourism, but people that are sampling in these dispensaries. They don't want them out driving. They want to make sure you're taking steps to ensure that you're not putting people on the road that are new to cannabis and that shouldn't be out there driving. They worry about congestion. They worry about traffic. Because some of these dispensaries, not that they're not next to each other, but they're in a certain radius. So
Right.
they do worry about the influx of traffic. So that's just something that you work with, your local representatives to kind of address and make sure that doesn't happen. And very successfully, people have been able to navigate that. As long as you're mindful about it, it's really not too hard to overcome something like that. The final thing is just to convince your local, boards and regulators that ecotourism is a good idea. Because, a lot of times they don't get involved until there's problems with the farms, until, sometimes there are, I don't want to say violent events, but cannabis is a cash business. So as a result of that, certain things happen that maybe wouldn't happen during a winery tour. So you just need to educate folks about the safety precautions you're taking, the screening, and let them know exactly what you're doing. And in most cases, they've been able to overcome any sort of complaints or issues they've had.
Oh, that's very interesting. Yeah, the safety has been an issue for a long time because of the cash nature of the industry, but
Right.
changing the business model from agricultural site to a tourism site does introduce a lot of complexity. That's great. So we've got a couple of minutes left, probably just a minute left. What does the future look like from where you are sitting for the cannabis tourism industry?
Well, I would say the future is green. It looks really good. There are some really new and exciting projects online. I think earlier we talked about not just the ecotourism and dispensaries. People are doing things like wellness retreats where they're infusing a cannabis experience with yoga, with really getting in touch with wellness. People are doing a cannabis supper club where they're curating culinary experiences that cannabis will enhance. People are having cannabis weddings. So all sorts of experiences that people want to amp up or make more meaningful, they're kind of bringing a cannabis component into it. So I think we're going to see more and more of these types of experiences and it's going to normalize more, and people are going to enjoy it more. And I think that it's just going to be something that more and more people get involved with. So I think it's a really new, exciting area for cannabis, and it's a good way to educate the public, demystify it, and make it a little more mainstream.
That's great. Thank you so much for joining us today on Legal Lunch Byte, giving us your insights, and look forward to catching up with you again soon.
Of course. Thanks for having me.
Thank you.